There was a young girl staying home alone on a stormy night. Her parents had gone out for the evening, leaving her in charge of the house. Her only companion was her faithful dog, a large, protective German shepherd that always kept watch. As the wind howled outside and the rain poured against the windows, the girl felt a sense of comfort in the familiar presence of her dog, who usually slept beneath her bed. She knew the dog would always protect her, as it had done countless times before. As the evening wore on, the girl settled in with a book, trying to distract herself from the eerie sounds of the storm. But then, she began to hear strange noises in the house, creaks in the floorboards, the sound of something scraping along the walls. The wind rattled the windows and the shadows in the corners of her room seemed to shift, though she tried to ignore them. But what unnerved her most was the sound from beneath her bed. Soft, steady breathing. The sound was so familiar. It was her dog, right? Her hand instinctively dangled off the side of the bed, reaching down towards the sound of her dog's steady breathing. Almost immediately, she felt the familiar sensation, the warm wetness of her dog's tongue, gently licking her hand in reassurance. She smiled, feeling comforted by the gesture, trying to shake off the unease that crept through her body. She had always known her dog would be there when she needed it. But then it happened again. The licking continued, soft at first, then more intense, as if her dog was trying to comfort her more urgently. Her hand tensed as the sensation grew more insistent. She could hear the dog's breathing grow louder, almost as if it was breathing in sync with her own growing anxiety. A slight shiver ran down her spine. It was odd, but she dismissed it. After all, dogs could be quirky at times, right? Another loud gust of wind rattled the house, but this time the girl heard something else, something she couldn't quite place. The breathing from beneath the bed didn't sound right. The sound was deeper, raspier, and then a low growl, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat. She pulled her hand back, feeling a sudden wave of cold wash over her. The growl was unlike anything she'd ever heard from her dog. Frozen, she lay there in the dark, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't dare move. The growling continued, growing louder and more guttural, until suddenly, the licking stopped. Everything was still. It was as though the house itself had held its breath. Morning came and the girl, still feeling unsettled, went to check on her dog. She called out its name once, then again louder, but there was no answer. She hurried to the spot beneath her bed, expecting to see the familiar eyes of her dog staring up at her. But the space under the bed was empty. She checked the whole house, calling the dog's name frantically, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Her panic set in, and she rushed outside, thinking maybe the dog had run off. She searched the yard, her heart racing. Still no sign of him. The sky was clear now, but something felt wrong, too wrong. As she stood there in the yard, staring at the empty house, she felt an odd compulsion to return inside. She reluctantly walked back in, her mind spinning with worry. It was then that she noticed something on the kitchen table, sitting just out of place. Something she hadn't seen before. A note, hastily scrawled, was placed there with an odd, unsettling sense of urgency. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, it read, written in a shaky, unrecognizable scrawl. The girl's heart dropped into her stomach, but there was something more. Beneath the note, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her dog's claws, shredded and bloody, as if they'd been torn from him. Her mind raced, and she turned around in horror. The note wasn't from her dog. It was from the thing that had been under her bed all night, something far darker. The dog had been hiding somewhere, terrified, just as she'd been. Her dog had been trying to warn her. The true horror wasn't the storm or the noises in the house. It was what had been lurking beneath her bed, just inches away from her hand. And whatever it wasn't finished with her. A young couple, Sarah and Mark, were on their way to a remote cabin in the countryside one late evening. They had been looking forward to a peaceful getaway, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. The cabin they rented was isolated, tucked away near a dense forest with no other homes for miles. They were excited for the quiet retreat ahead. As they drove along the winding road, the fog started to roll in, thick and heavy, reducing visibility. Mark kept his focus on the road, but Sarah couldn't shake that feeling that something was off. The headlights of the car cut through the mist, and every now and then, Sarah swore she saw strange shapes moving in the trees, their shadows stretching unnaturally long. Despite Mark's reassurances, Sarah couldn't quite shake the unease that was building within her. Then, just as they reached their destination, the radio suddenly flickered to life. It was faint at first, but soon became clear. A distorted voice cut through the static, speaking quickly and urgently. Dangerous. Escaped. Armed. Hook. Lock your doors. Sarah jumped, her eyes wide. She looked at Mark, who was now frowning and fiddling with the radio dial, but it was just static now. He turned it off, trying to brush it off as a glitch, but Sarah couldn't shake the ominous feeling that lingered. Minutes later, they arrived at the cabin, parking in the dark, secluded driveway. Mark got out of the car, stretching his arms, while Sarah stayed inside, her nerves on edge. The cabin stood in front of them, cloaked in darkness, the only sound being the wind and the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees. Sarah couldn't help but feel as though the entire forest was alive, silently observing their every move. Mark, oblivious to her growing panic, began unpacking the car, but Sarah's senses were on high alert. She heard something, faint at first, but unmistakable, a dragging sound. Something metallic scraping against the ground. It came from the darkness, deeper in the trees. She grabbed Mark's arm, her voice trembling. Mark turned, listening intently. The sound stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier. Then out of the fog, a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the trees. It was tall and moved with a slow, deliberate drag. As it stepped closer, Sarah could see a man dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by shadow. His hand, or what was left of it, was replaced by a long, gleaming hook. The man didn't speak. He just dragged the hook across the ground, the sound scraping through the air like a death sentence. Sarah tugged at Mark's arm, pulling him towards the cabin. She urged him to hurry, but when they reached for the door, it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door didn't budge. He tried again, panic rising. The scraping sound grew louder as the figure came closer. Sarah's heart raced as they scrambled, desperately trying to get inside, but the door was jammed and there was no way in. Trapped on the porch, they looked around for any way out. The figure was nearing them, and the scraping of the hook on the ground was deafening now. Then, in the cold night air, Sarah felt a chill settle on her shoulder, a cold metal touch. She spun around, but there was no one there. The sound of the scraping stopped, and the figure had vanished. For a moment, they stood frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. The silence felt thicker than ever. Mark managed to yank open the door, and they rushed inside, locking it behind them. They bolted the windows, took a deep breath, and tried to steady their nerves. But even inside, the tension didn't ease. It felt like the very air in the house had thickened, pressing down on them as if something unseen was watching and waiting. As Sarah sat on the couch, trying to calm herself, she noticed something glimmering in the dim light. A hook, wedged deep into the fabric of the couch. Her blood ran cold as she stared at it, her mind racing. The hook wasn't there before, it had been placed there. Mark tried to reassure her, insisting that this was some sort of prank, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had followed them. The terror hadn't ended, it was only just beginning. They left at first light, heading back to the car with one final glance at the cabin, but as they drove away, Sarah couldn't help but glance back one more time. In the distance, standing at the edge of the trees, she saw the silhouette of the man again, his hook gleaming in the early morning light, and though they were miles away now, she could feel the weight of his eyes on her, watching them leave. A young man named Jake had just moved to a new city, eager to start fresh. He found a small, charming house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts. It was an older home, full of character, and it felt perfect for him. The only odd thing about the house was the old woman who lived next door. Her name was Mrs. Larkin, and she was known to be a bit of a recluse. In the first few days after moving in, Jake noticed Mrs. Larkin watching him from her front window, her eyes hidden behind a thin veil of lace curtains. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but the longer he stayed, the more it seemed as if her gaze never left. It made him uneasy, but he tried to ignore it. One evening just after sunset, Jake was outside, tending to his garden, when he heard something. It was a soft, almost inaudible call, like a voice carried on the wind. His name, called so quietly, it was almost a whisper. He looked up, and there, standing on her porch, was Mrs. Larkin. She was wrapped in a shawl, her frail figure barely visible in the dim light. She waved him over, her hands trembling slightly. Though Jake felt uneasy, he didn't want to be rude, so he walked up to her porch, Mrs. Larkin invited him inside, telling him that her house had been acting strangely, especially when the sun went down. It was unsettling, but Jake agreed to go in. He didn't want to seem dismissive. As Jake stepped inside the house, a chill settled in the air. The room was dark, and only the flickering light from a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. The smell of dust and something musty filled his nose. The house was old, but that wasn't what bothered him. It was an eerie silence that something was wrong. Mrs. Larkin led him through a narrow hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and as they passed by, Jake noticed that the walls were lined with strange paintings. Each one seemed to depict a face, twisted, distorted, but all with eyes that followed him as he moved. They stopped in front of an ornate mirror hanging at the end of the hall. It was framed with intricate carvings, and layers of dust had settled over it. Mrs. Larkin wiped the dust away, revealing a reflection that made Jake's heart race. He looked into the mirror and saw a young woman, one who seemed familiar, though not quite right. She was dressed in a long white gown, standing in front of the same mirror, smiling at him. Jake felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The reflection was not of Mrs. Larkin, but a much younger version of her. The woman in the mirror had a strange, cold smile, one that sent a chill down his spine. He glanced at Mrs. Larkin standing beside him. Her hands were trembling, her face pale. Mrs. Larkin's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible in the heavy silence of the room. She explained that she had been trapped in the house for years, unable to leave. She spoke of a curse that had bound her to the house and to the mirror. It trapped her in time, forcing her to live as both the woman she has been and the woman she is now. The mirror held her, but it also held the souls of others who had entered the house, souls that could never escape. Jake felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He wanted to leave, to run out the door and never look back, but something held him in place. The house felt like it was closing in on him. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, and though the house itself was pulling him deeper into its web. The whispering grew louder, filling the air with a low, dissonant hum. Jake turned back to the mirror, his gaze drawn to it despite his fear. The young woman's face in the reflection twisted, her smile turning into a horrifying, mocking expression. Slowly her features began to distort, as though her face was being stretched by invisible hands. The eyes in the reflection widened, becoming hollow, staring straight into his soul. And then Jake's heart froze. The reflection of the woman in the mirror changed completely. It was no longer the young woman. Now, it was his own face, distorted with fear. His eyes were wide, his mouth open in a silent scream. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. His reflection, his very being, was trapped, frozen in time, as if the house seemed to pulse with dark energy. Then he heard the voice again, louder this time, reverberating through the walls of the house. It wasn't Mrs. Larkin's voice anymore. It was something else, something deep and ancient, whispering from all directions. "You've stayed too long," the voice said. "You've become part of it.